Hi everyone, this video is about learning targets. So what I like to do is give you a brief overview of learning targets, which you may know as learning goals or learning objectives. So quickly, just the definition is learning targets are what students will understand or be able to do. The question is, well, why is it important to focus on learning targets? Marzano's laboratory did some research, a meta-analysis of different teaching strategies and tested the effectiveness of those different strategies. So they looked at dozens of studies and combined those results. Looking at the data, we can see that 34% gain when teachers track student progress and use scoring scales. And then in second place was the setting goals and objectives. So when you think about standards-based grading, the heart of standards-based grading is setting those learning targets or those goals and tracking student progress towards those goals by using scoring scales. So when you look at the two most effective strategies in Marzano's study, meta-analysis, you see that two of them are related to standards-based grading, and the heart of standards-based grading is those learning goals. So let's talk a little bit about some characteristics of learning goals. So one thing for learning goals to be effective is that it has to be posted to students. Students need to be aware of the learning targets. And if they are going to be aware of those learning targets, then of course it has to be written in student-friendly language. Two other characteristics is that we're talking about large picture items, right? We're talking about overarching goals, right? So we're not talking about random facts that students need to be able to memorize. We're talking about big ideas here, things that you can organize a course around. And then there has to be some indication of how they're going to meet that goal. So we refer to that as being performance reference. So it has to refer to some actions that students will take in order to demonstrate learning. Now, our research in cognitive science and memory tells us that there are two different ways of remembering things. There are two different things you can remember. So you think about those brain studies in which someone who's had some kind of injury and they have amnesia of facts, but they still know how to play the piano, for example. So that points out that there are two types of knowledge and two types of learning goals. One is declarative, and those are the facts, and the other is procedural, and those are the skills. So learning goals can be declarative or they can be procedural. Let's make sure we understand what those things mean. I want to show you a few examples. But typically when we think about the declarative learning goals, and those are the content-based learning goals, that those typically, not always, but typically happen within units. Procedural, though, remember, procedural are skill-based learning targets. That usually happens across units. I have a list of learning targets that I want you to take a look at, and I want you to identify them as either declarative or as procedural. Now, one thing I want to clarify is that learning targets are not activities and they're not assignments. You could think about activities and assignments as the experiences that help students obtain the learning targets. So the learning targets are what students should know and be able to do, but the activities and the assignments, those are the things that you have students do in order to gain those or demonstrate those learning targets. So again, I have a list of things that I want you to sort as either learning targets or activities/assignments. Now, when you construct learning targets, you really want to think about as I said, they're overarching things. So these should be high order thinking learning targets. So if we look at the revised Bloom's taxonomy, starting with remembering, understanding, then up through applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, that when we design our learning targets, we really want them to be at minimum at the applying level up through the creation level. Now, that doesn't mean that that the lower content isn't important. In many ways, you need to have access to facts and make sure you understand those facts in order to do application tasks or to create, to evaluate. But when you're designing your learning targets, you really want them to be at the higher order Bloom's task. And so we will provide you with verbs that will help you craft those learning targets and associate them with one of the Bloom's levels.